April 23, 1945. Oval Office, 10:45 a.m. Harry Truman sat across from Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. 11 days as president, still learning where bathrooms were. Everyone said allies trusted each other. Roosevelt said no secrets between partners. Stalin said agreements honored. They were all lying. Molotov mentioned promises Roosevelt made. Specific promises: Eastern Europe, Poland's government, Soviet control. Truman had never heard these promises. This one conversation would trigger 45 years of Cold War. Before, Allied unity, shared victory, democratic future. After, Iron Curtain, nuclear standoff, Enslaved. How did one dying president's secret deals create global catastrophe? Watch what happened when Roosevelt traded nations he didn't own. Molotov expected friendly conversation, courtesy call, United Nations pleasantries, handshakes. Instead got confrontation. Truman demanded answers about Poland, Soviet troops installing communists, arresting opposition, ignoring elections. Molotov shocked, confused. President Roosevelt agreed to this at Yalta. Truman stared. No one told me about any such agreement. That moment shattered post-war cooperation. Meeting ended badly. Molotov left shaken. Later said he'd never been talked to like that in his life. Truman felt he'd stood firm against aggression. Then advisors brought actual Yalta documents. Molotov wasn't lying. Roosevelt had made those promises. Traded Eastern Europe for Soviet cooperation. Never told his vice president. Question haunted Truman rest of presidency. What else didn't Roosevelt tell him? What other secret deals existed? How many nations have been traded? How many promises made? Answers would prove worse than questions. 11 million people in Poland alone. 100 million across Eastern Europe. 45 years of captivity ahead. All because one conversation happened in 1945. One dying president made one terrible deal. Watch how Roosevelt's secret destroyed nations. February 1945. Yalta Conference. Germany collapsing. Red Army 40 miles from Berlin. War in Europe nearly over. But new war already beginning. Not with Germany. With former allies. Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin met at Yalta Resort on Black Sea. Soviet territory. Stalin's home advantage. More critical, Red Army control ground. Soviet troops occupied Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Not theoretical control. Soldiers on ground. Officials installing governments. Secret police arresting opposition. Physical occupation. Complete dominance. Churchill saw danger. Soviet empire forming. Democracy dying. Wanted Roosevelt to demand Stalin honor commitments. Self-determination. Free elections. National sovereignty. Roosevelt had different priorities. Different calculations. Different fears. Calculations that would doom millions. Roosevelt needed three things from Stalin. First, Soviet entry against Japan. Atomic bomb not ready yet. Manhattan Project still testing. Military estimated invasion of Japan would cost 500,000 American casualties. Perhaps 1 million total Allied deaths. Soviet attack from north might force surrender without invasion. Might save 500,000 American lives. Second, Soviet cooperation creating United Nations. Roosevelt believed international organization essential. Prevent future wars. Collective security. Peaceful dispute resolution. Without Soviet, amin Angles. Third, quick conference conclusion. Roosevelt dying. Everyone could see it. Lost 30 pounds in 6 months. Face gaunt. Hands trembled. Struggled concentrating during meetings. Personal physician later admitted Roosevelt had months to live. Roosevelt probably knew. Wanted agreements finished. Wanted to go home. Stalin understood everything. History's most ruthless negotiator. Knew Roosevelt dying. Knew Roosevelt needed Soviet help against Japan. Knew Roosevelt valued UN above almost everything. Used every piece of leverage. Extracted enormous concessions. Both sides had incomplete information. Roosevelt didn't know full extent of Soviet intentions. Stalin didn't know about atomic bomb. Neither understood how their decisions would cascade. American intelligence reported Soviet control Eastern Europe. Reports detailed secret police operations, political arrests, puppet governments forming. But Roosevelt dismissed concerns. Believed personal relationship with Stalin mattered more than intelligence reports. Believed Uncle Joe could be trusted. Called Stalin friend, partner, ally. Soviet intelligence knew American atomic program existed. Spies at Los Alamos. Manhattan Project compromised. But Stalin didn't know bomb would work. Didn't know Americans would have weaponed by August. Didn't know Japanese surrender would come without Soviet help. So Stalin negotiated as if Soviet entry against Japan was valuable. Roosevelt negotiated as if he desperately needed it. Both operating on false assumptions. False assumptions with catastrophic consequences. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 63 years old, fourth presidential term, architect of New Deal, commander-in-chief through World War II, most powerful man in America, but body failing, mind sometimes confused, death 2 months away. Winston Churchill, 70 years old, British Prime Minister, fought Hitler when Britain stood alone, brilliant strategist, powerful orator, stubborn defender of empire, saw Soviet threat clearly, lacked power to stop it alone. Joseph Stalin, 66 years old, Soviet dictator, survived Hitler's invasion, lost 27 million Soviet citizens. Paranoid, ruthless, absolutely determined Soviet Union never threatened again, controlled largest army on earth, occupied half of Europe. And Harry Truman, 60 years old, vice president, lawyer from Missouri, senator for 10 years. Roosevelt barely knew him, rarely included him, chosen as running mate for political balance. Not prepared, not informed, not consulted. 82 days as vice president when Roosevelt died. Never briefed on Manhattan Project. Never told about Yalta agreements. Never prepared for presidency he was about to inherit. Roosevelt saw Truman 2 times alone during vice presidency. 2 times. 82 days. Barely spoke beyond pleasantries. Now Truman would inherit Roosevelt's secrets and discover consequences Roosevelt wouldn't live to face. At Yalta, Roosevelt made calculations. Calculations that seemed reasonable. Trade territory for cooperation. Trade principles for alliance. Trade Eastern European freedom for American lives. Math seemed simple. Math was catastrophic. Watch what Roosevelt promised Stalin. Watch what it cost. February 7th, 1945. Day 3 at Yalta. Poland discussion. For hours. Churchill agitated. Stalin calm. Roosevelt watched both. Noticed Stalin's pattern. When Stalin wanted something badly, he became quieter. Softer voice. Slower words. More reasonable tone. Stalin was being very quiet about Poland. Very soft. Very reasonable. Roosevelt's attention sharpened. Stalin laid out position. Poland must have friendly government. Friendly meant communist. Meant Soviet-controlled. Poland bordered USSR. Invasion route used repeatedly. Napoleon 1812. Germany 1914. Germany again 1941. Poland could never threaten Soviet Union again. Security requirement. Non-negotiable. Churchill objected. Britain entered war to defend Poland's independence. Polish government in exile in London. Poles fought alongside allies entire war. 100,000 Polish soldiers under British command. Polish pilots fought Battle of Britain. Polish resistance fought Nazis. Poland deserved independence. Deserved democracy. Deserved freedom. Stalin listened. Smiled slightly. Soviet Union also values Polish freedom. That's why we liberated Poland from Nazis. Omitted inconvenient fact. USSR invaded Poland alongside Hitler in 1939. Divided Poland with Germany. Occupied eastern half. Executed 22,000 Polish officers at Cadden Forest. Now claimed liberation. Churchill knew history. Protested. Roosevelt intervened. What Roosevelt noticed, Stalin wouldn't negotiate on Poland's government. Would negotiate on everything else. Borders. Territory. Reparations. United Nations. But not government composition. This was Stalin's price. Price for everything Roosevelt wanted. Roosevelt's mind flashed to conversation with Secretary of State Cordell Hull. 6 months earlier, August 1944, Hull warned, Soviets won't leave countries they occupy. History proves it. Roosevelt had dismissed concern, believed personal diplomacy could overcome historical patterns. Now, watching Stalin, seeing intransigence, seeing exactly what Hull predicted. Churchill still arguing. Stalin's expression unchanged. Roosevelt calculated. Could force confrontation. Could demand free Poland. Could threaten. Then what? Red Army occupied Poland. For 100,000 Soviet troops on ground. Americans and British couldn't remove them without war. New war. Against former ally. After 6 years of global conflict. American public would never accept it. Alternative. Accept Soviet control. Get something in return. Get Soviet entry against Japan. Save American lives. Get UN cooperation. Build post-war peace. Get vague promise of elections. Hope Stalin honors it. Heart rate increased. Breathing shallow. Roosevelt felt weight of decision. Saw pattern clearly. Poland's freedom versus American lives. Eastern European democracy versus Japanese invasion. Principles versus pragmatism. Roosevelt had made similar calculations throughout war. Allied with Stalin despite knowledge of Soviet atrocities. Deferred colonial independence despite rhetoric about freedom. In turn, Japanese Americans despite constitutional principles. War required hard choices. This felt like another. Felt like necessary evil. But this felt different. This felt like betrayal. Betrayal of everything allies claimed to fight for. Betrayal of Poland. Betrayal of democracy. Betrayal of principle. Roosevelt's hands trembled. Not just from illness. 90 seconds to respond. Churchill waiting. Stalin watching. If Roosevelt supported Churchill, confrontation with Stalin. Possible breakdown of conference. Non coopération. No Soviet help against Japan. Invasion casualties. If Roosevelt compromised, accept Soviet Poland. Get cooperation. Get agreements. Save American lives. Abandon principles. Abandon Poland. Abandon million. Roosevelt gestured slightly. Signaled to Churchill, don't push further. Decision took 8 seconds, but would echo 45 years. Perhaps we can find language that addresses both concerns. Churchill's face fell. Knew what that meant. Stalin smiled. Also knew. No going back. Next 3 days, Stalin extracted everything. Used Roosevelt's decision as leverage. Pressed every advantage. Poland's government, communist-dominated provisional government, recognized. Would include some democratic leaders. How many? Undefined. Which leaders? Unspecified. When? Soon as possible. Language deliberately vague. Meaninglessly elastic. Stalin could claim compliance while installing dictatorship. Elections promised. Free and unfettered. Date? As soon as possible. International observers? Not mentioned. Ballot requirements? Not specified. Enforcement? None. Stalin got promise without mechanism. Roosevelt got mechanism without enforcement. Poland's borders moved 150 miles westward. Soviet Union annexed Eastern Poland, 77,000 square miles. Poland compensated with German territory, 39,000 square miles. Net loss, 38,000 square miles. Population transferred, 3 million Poles from east, 7 million Germans from west. Largest forced migration in European history. Stalin approved. Germany punished. USSR expanded. Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Independent nations before war. Annexed by USSR in 1940. Roosevelt and Churchill said nothing. Stalin's occupation accepted. Annexation legitimized. 1,500,000 people absorbed into Soviet Union. Democracy erased. Independence ended. Romanian, Bulgarian, Hungarian governments, broadly representative. Same vague language. Same meaningless promises. Stalin would install communists everywhere. Call them representative. Claim compliance. Asian concessions. Stalin's price for attacking Japan. Return of territories Russia lost to Japan, 1905. Southern Sakhalin. Kuril Islands. Port Arthur lease. Control of Manchurian railways. Recognition of Soviet Mongolia. Roosevelt giving away Chinese territory. Chinese government not consulted. Not informed. Not present. Nationalist China was American ally. Roosevelt traded their sovereignty without asking. Chiang Kai-shek would learn later. Would feel betrayed. Would be right. United Nations. Stalin got veto power in Security Council. Soviet republics got separate votes in General Assembly. Ukrainian SSR. Belarusian SSR. USSR itself. 3 votes for Soviet Union. Voted identically on everything. Gave Stalin triple influence. Roosevelt accepted. Needed Soviet participation. Every concession bought with principles. Every agreement written in betrayal. Agreements signed February 11th, 1945. Yalta Conference Declaration. Agreement on Poland. Far Eastern Agreement. All classified secret. American public not informed. Congress not consulted. Allied parliaments not told. Specifically, Harry Truman not briefed. Vice President kept ignorant. Why? Roosevelt knew agreements indefensible. Knew public would object. Knew giving away Eastern Europe impossible to justify. So kept secret. Plan to manage information later. Plan to present as diplomatic victory. Plan to claim Stalin would honor commitments. Never had chance. Death came first. Churchill returned to London troubled. Told colleagues. Poor Neville Chamberlain believed he could trust Hitler. He was wrong. I believe I can trust Stalin. I hope I'm not wrong. Hope was not strategy. Trust was not verification. Churchill was wrong. Polish government in exile in London learned through rumors. Not informed officially. Not consulted. Not told their nation traded. Prime Minister Stanislav Nikowajczyk met Roosevelt March 1945. Demanded answers. Roosevelt assured him elections would be free. Soviet troops temporary. Democracy guaranteed. Nikowajczyk didn't believe him. Events would prove Nikowajczyk right. Red Army already moving before ink dried. February 12th. Polish resistance leaders invited to Moscow for negotiations. March 1945. 16 Polish underground leaders arrested. Charged with terrorism. Tried in Moscow. Convicted. Imprisoned. Leaders who fought Nazis for 6 years. Imprisoned by Soviets for defending Poland. Yalta agreements provided cover. Provisional government needed reorganization. Anti-Soviet elements needed removal. Terrorists needed trial. Language from Yalta enabled suppression. Romania. King Michael forced to appoint communist government. March 6, 1945. Soviet troops surrounded palace. Choice: appoint communists or face consequences. King capitulated. Bulgaria. Opposition politicians arrested en masse. 2,000 plus Democratic leaders imprisoned February-March 1945. Trials rigged. Executions followed. Democracy eliminated. Hungary. Soviet control solidified. Non-communist parties restricted. Elections manipulated. Freedom crushed. All compliant with Yalta language. All representative governments. All democratic processes. All lies. Stalin believed Roosevelt understood deal. Territory for cooperation. Control for alliance. Eastern Europe for Pacific War. Clear transaction. Both sides benefited. Roosevelt got Soviet offensive against Japan. Stalin got buffer zone against future invasion. From Stalin's view, fair exchange. From Stalin's view, American objections later were bad faith. Agreement was agreement. Roosevelt shook hands. Roosevelt signed papers. Roosevelt accepted reality. Then Roosevelt died. Then Truman rejected agreements. Then Americans acted betrayed. Stalin felt betrayed first. Felt Americans reneged. Felt justified in everything that followed. This misunderstanding poisoned everything. Both sides felt cheated. Both sides blamed other. Both sides escalated. Cold War's foundation. Mutual betrayal at Yalta. Both sides right. Both sides wrong. Millions paid price. April 12, 1945. Warm Springs, Georgia. 3:35 p.m. Roosevelt died. Cerebral hemorrhage. Truman learned he was president 5:25 p.m. Reporter Eleanor Roosevelt. Harry, the president is dead. Truman stunned. Is there anything I can do for you? Roosevelt. Is there anything we can do for you? You're the one in trouble now. Accurate assessment. Trouble worse than Truman knew. First briefing shocking. Manhattan Project. Atomic bomb program. $2 billion spent. Truman never told. War plans. Pacific invasion scheduled November 1945. 1 million casualties estimated. Truman never consulted. Diplomatic agreements. Yalta, Tehran. Countless bilateral deals. Truman never informed. Papers everywhere. Decisions everywhere. Secrets everywhere. Roosevelt ran war from wheelchair and telephone. Kept information close. Shared minimally. Documented poorly. Truman inherited chaos. April 23, 1945. 11 days into presidency. Truman still learning basics. Who ran what? Who knew what? What was promised to whom? Advisors brought conflicting information. Some said Stalin honoring Yalta. Some said Stalin violating Yalta. Hard to know truth when you didn't know what was agreed. Molotov in Washington for United Nations conference. Expected courtesy call. Expected continuity. Expected new president would honor old agreements. Truman's advisors split. Secretary of State Edward Stettinius. Don't provoke Soviets. Maintain alliance. Ambassador Avril Harriman. Stalin must be confronted. Poland is test case. Admiral William Leahy. Yalta agreements worthless. Stalin never intended compliance. Truman studied Poland reports. Soviet troops, 400,000 in Poland. Polish government. 18 communists for non-communists. Elections postponed indefinitely. Opposition arrested systematically. Press controlled completely. This was reorganized government. This was free elections. This was what Roosevelt agreed to. Truman's anger grew, not just at Stalin, at Roosevelt. How could Roosevelt make these deals? How could Roosevelt keep secrets? How could Roosevelt leave no guidance? Made decision, confront Molotov. Molotov entered Oval Office expecting handshakes. Got lecture. Truman blunt. Soviet Union violating Poland agreements. Promised reorganized government. Installed communists. Promised free elections. Arrested opposition. Promised cooperation. Delivered occupation. Molotov shocked. Tried explaining. Soviet Union implementing Yalta exactly as agreed. Roosevelt understood Soviet security concerns. Roosevelt accepted friendly government in Poland. Roosevelt signed agreements. Truman interrupted. Agreements must be carried out. Poland needs free elections. Molotov. President Roosevelt promised. Truman, I don't care what President Roosevelt promised. I care what's right. Molotov's face reddened. Never spoken to this way. Foreign minister of superpower. Victor over Hitler. Representative of Stalin. Being lectured by president of 11 days. I've never been talked to like that in my life. Truman, carry out your agreements and you won't get talked to like that. Meeting ended. Molotov left shaken. Truman felt he'd stood firm. Advisors proud. Harriman especially. America drawing line. America defending principles. Then someone brought actual Yalta documents. Truman read agreements. Read language about provisional government. Read promises about friendly government. Read vagueness about free elections. Read concessions about territory. Read Far Eastern Agreement. Chinese territory given away. Stomach sank. Molotov wasn't lying. Roosevelt had agreed to exactly what Stalin was doing. Reorganized government broadly representative meant what? Meant whatever Stalin said it meant. Free and unfettered elections as soon as possible meant what? Meant whenever Stalin decided. Interim governmental authorities meant what? Meant Soviet-controlled puppets. Every phrase deliberate. Every word vague. Roosevelt had made deals allowing exactly what Truman just condemned. Worse, Roosevelt never told him, never briefed him, never explained, never prepared him, left him to discover from Stalin's foreign minister, left him to look foolish confronting Soviets about agreements Roosevelt signed. Truman felt betrayed. By Roosevelt. By circumstances. By history. Inherited not just presidency. Inherited catastrophe. Inherited 45 years of consequences. What Yalta enabled, Soviet power completed. Poland, elections finally held January 1947. Opposition parties harassed. Candidates arrested. Ballots manipulated. Communist victory, 80% of votes. Nobody believed it. Nobody could prove fraud. Yalta language gave cover. Democratic opposition crushed completely by 1948. 100,000 plus imprisoned. 6,000 plus executed. Underground resistance destroyed. Poland became satellite. Romania. King Michael abdicated December 1947. Forced at gunpoint. Communists took complete control. Opposition partie bande. Leaders executed. Democratic politicians imprisoned en masse. 500 plus political prisoners by 1948. Tens of thousands later, Romania became satellite. Hungary. Elections 1947 produced communist victory. Actual votes, 17% communist. Reported votes, 45% communist. Armed intimidation. Ballot stuffing. Result manipulation. Coalition government forced. Communists controlled security. Used control to eliminate opposition. By 1948, one-party state. Cardinal Mindsany arrested, tortured, show trial, life sentence. Hungary became satellite. Czechoslovakia, last domino. Only functioning democracy in Eastern Europe. Free elections, 1946. Coalition government. President Edvard Benes. February 1948, communist coup. Soviet troops massed on border. Kolonijas ministers vysaind en masse. Created crisis. Demanded emergency powers. Seized control. Non-communist ministers found dead. Suicides. Jan Masaryk, foreign minister, found dead beneath window. Jumped. Nobody believed it. Czechoslovakia became satellite. Greece. Civil War 1946 to 1949. Communist guerrillas backed by Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Albania. Threatened to make Greece Soviet satellite. Truman intervened. Truman Doctrine, March 1947. America would support free peoples resisting subjugation. $2 billion to Greece and Turkey. Communist insurgency defeated 1949. Greece remained free, but exception proved rule. Where Soviet armies stood, communism ruled. Where American power reached, freedom survived. Line drawn through Europe. West, free, democratic, rebuilding. East, captive, totalitarian, suffering. Iron Curtain descended. Exactly as Churchill predicted. Exactly as Yalta enabled. 100 million people behind Iron Curtain. 45 years of captivity ahead. Because of secret deals made in 1945. Harry Truman never fully recovered from betrayal. Discovered it April 23, 1945. Carried weight rest of life. Age 60 when became president. Looked 70 by 1948. Constant stress. Sleepless nights. Impossible décision. Blood pressure skyrocketed. 175/88 to 210/120 in 3 years. Doctors warned. Stroke risk. Heart attack risk. Death risk. Truman ignored them. Work required. Consequences required facing. But body paid price. Headaches daily. Vision problems. Exhaustion chronic. Hands trembled when reading Yalta documents. Not age. Not illness. Anger. Anger at Roosevelt. Anger at Stalin. Anger at circumstances. Anger at having to fix disaster he didn't create. Every morning, briefings about Eastern Europe. New arrests. New executions. New suppressions. Simple act of reading reports became torture. Physical reminder of Roosevelt's failure. Physical burden of Truman's responsibility. Left office January 1953. Age 68. Looked 80. Doctors. Presidency aged him 20 years. Truman. Job required it. Lived to 88. Long life by standards. But damaged. Worn. Burdened. Every day carried Yalta's weight. Every day remembered April 23rd. Day discovered predecessor's betrayal. Day inherited catastrophe. Never forgot. Never forgave. Truman never spoke publicly about anger at Roosevelt. Loyalty. Respect. Democratic unity. But privately, bitterness. Diary entries reveal depth. May 1945. Stalin is an SOB. But of course he thinks I'm an SOB. June 1945. FDR thought he could charm Stalin. Died before learning otherwise. July 1945. Inherited a mess. Expected to fix it. Not given tools. Sleep patterns destroyed. Wolke 3 Uhr nachts regularly. Couldn't return to sleep. Mind racing. What if I'd been told? What if I'd been prepared? What if Roosevelt had been honest? Triggers developed. Word Yalta caused visible tension. Jaw clenched. Hands gripped desk. Voice hardened. References to Roosevelt's great diplomacy triggered anger. Great diplomacy? He sold nations he didn't own. Never said publicly. Often said privately. Started walking daily. Dawn walks. 2 miles minimum. Exercise. Stress relief. Thinking time. Walked alone. Secret Service followed distance. Time to process. Time to decide. Time to cope. Helped. Physical exhaustion replaced mental exhaustion. But memories remained. 30 years later, interviews for Presidential Library. Asked about biggest challenge. Didn't hesitate. Learning I couldn't trust what Roosevelt told Stalin. Pause. Learning Roosevelt told Stalin things he didn't tell me. Another pause. Learning millions would pay for Roosevelt's secrets. Interviewer noted tears in Truman's eyes. 1972, 27 years after Yalta. Still hurt. Still angry. Still haunted. Truman's relationship with Roosevelt family never recovered. Eleanor Roosevelt criticized Truman's Soviet policy. Said Franklin would have maintained cooperation. Said Truman too confrontational. Too rigid. Too harsh. Truman bit tongue publicly. Privately. She doesn't know what FDR agreed to. Ido. Roosevelt children split. Some supported Truman. Some opposed. Family divided. Truman invited to Roosevelt memorials reluctantly. Attended dutifully. Smiled appropriately. Said nothing, but felt outsider. Felt blamed for Roosevelt's failures. Felt judged for fixing Roosevelt's disasters. Democratic Party divided. Liberal wing. Continue Roosevelt's cooperation with Soviets. Conservative wing. Confronts Soviet expansion. Truman caught middle. Accused of betraying Roosevelt's legacy by liberals. Accused of insufficient toughness by conservatives. 1948 election. Party split 3 ways. Liberals formed Progressive Party. nominated Henry Wallace. Conservatives formed States Rights Party. Nominated Strom Truman. Truman ran as Democrat. Everyone predicted loss. Truman won, but Democratic unity shattered. Party wouldn't reunify for generation. Personal friendships damaged. Old Senate colleagues questioned decisions. Friends asked, why antagonize Soviets? Truman couldn't explain without revealing Roosevelt's secrets. Revealing secrets would damage Democratic Party, damage Roosevelt's legacy, damage national unity. So Truman stayed silent, accepted criticism, absorbed blame, protected Roosevelt's reputation at cost of his own. Later called this hardest part, not decisions, not responsibility, silence, knowing truth, unable to share it, taking blame for fixing what Roosevelt broke. Truman's presidency initially judged failure. Left office 1953 with 32% approval rating. Lowest presidential approval in history at that time. Kolean Barstalamata. McCarthy investigations. Corruption scandale. Public exhausted. Wanted change. Wanted Eisenhower. Truman returned to Missouri quietly. No foundation. No presidential library immediately. No staff. Lived on army pension. $112.56 monthly. Refused corporate positions. Wouldn't trade on presidency. Recognition came slowly. 1960s. Historians reevaluated Truman presidency. Containment policy credited with winning Cold War. NATO creation recognized as masterpiece. Marshall Plan acknowledged as brilliant. Truman doctrine seen as necessary confrontation. By 1970s, Truman ranked top 10 president. By 1990s, frequently ranked top 5. After Soviet collapse, 1991, Vindication. Policies Truman implemented had worked. Communism contained. Democracy spread. Freedom won. 45 years. But won. Truman died 1972. Age 88. Lived to see reassessment begin. Didn't live to see final victory. Didn't live to see Eastern Europe freed. Didn't live to see Yalta's chains broken. But knew he'd done right thing. Knew he'd stood firm when predecessor folded. Knew he defended principles when Roosevelt traded them. Medal of Recognition came posthumously. Presidential Medal of Freedom. Congressional Gold Medal. Numerous honors. He saved democracy in Western Europe. Got quiet retirement and delayed recognition. Math never works. Never does. 100 million people behind Iron Curtain. Equals 100 million lives diminished. Equals 100 million freedoms stolen. Equals 45 years times 100 million is equal to 4,500,000,000 person years of captivity. Not number, not statistic. 4.5 billion years of human potential crushed. Children who couldn't choose careers. Adults who couldn't travel. Families who couldn't speak freely. Artists who couldn't create. Writers who couldn't publish. Teachers who couldn't educate. Scientists who couldn't research. Entire generations born into captivity. Live entire lives unfree. Died without knowing liberty. Because Roosevelt made secret deals. Because Truman inherited disaster. Because Yalta enabled Stalin. Ripple from one conference. Wave of suffering for half-century. Yalta's failure transformed American military doctrine. Never again would America rely on diplomatic promises without military backing. Lesson: territory controlled is territory kept. Soviet occupation became Soviet possession. No negotiation changed that. Only force mattered. NATO created 1949 directly because of Yalta. Military alliance. Permanent American troops in Europe. Not promises. Not agreements. Not trust. Soldiers on ground. Bases established. Weapons deployed. Article 5. Attack on one is attack on all. Collective defense. Automatic response. No vague language. No elastic interpretation. Clear commitment. Military guarantee. 12 founding members, April 1949. Today, 32 members. Never once invoked until September 12, 2001. After September 11th attacks. Allies honored commitment. But original purpose: prevent Soviet expansion. Ensure Western Europe never fell like Eastern Europe. Ensure democratic governments had military protection. Ensure freedom had armed defenders. Worked perfectly. Not 1 inch of NATO territory ever fell to communism. Not one NATO member ever became Soviet satellite. Not one democratic government in NATO ever overthrown. Because military presence backed diplomatic promises. Because soldiers guaranteed what words could not. Containment doctrine emerged from Yalta's failure. George Kennan's long telegram, February 1946. 9,000 words explaining Soviet behavior. USSR would expand wherever possible. Couldn't be trusted. Couldn't be charmed. Couldn't be persuaded. Only firm resistance would stop expansion. Must contain. Must resist. Must outlast. Truman adopted completely. Truman Doctrine, March 1947. Military and economic aid to nations resisting communism. Marshall Plan, April 1948. $13 billion rebuilding Western Europe. Made Western Europe prosperous, resistant to communist appeal. Berlin Airlift, 1948 to 1949. When Soviets blocked Berlin, America supplied by air. 2,326,406 ton supplies. 278,228 flights. 15 months. Proved America wouldn't abandon commitments. Proved resistance worked. Soviets lifted blockade, May 1949. All because Yalta taught, promises without power are worthless. Cold War strategy emerged from Yalta's lessons. Military balance became obsession. Nuclear weapons program accelerated. Atomic monopoly ended 1949 when Soviets tested bomb. Hydrogen bomb program began immediately. Arms race launched. Both sides built arsenals capable of destroying civilization. Mutually assured destruction became doctrine. Mad. Neither side could win nuclear war. Both would die. Therefore, neither would start. Prevented World War III. Risked human extinction. Strategy born from Yalta. Trust nothing. Verify everything. Maintain overwhelming force. Proxy wars became norm. Direct U.S.-Soviet conflict too dangerous. Instead, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, Nicaragua, countless others. Millions died in conflicts neither superpower officially fought. Both sides armed proxies. Both sides funded insurgencies. Both sides destabilized governments. All to avoid direct confrontation. All because Yalta showed cooperation impossible. All because Roosevelt's trust proved catastrophic. Intelligence agencies expanded massively. CIA created 1947. KGB expanded enormously. Both sides spying constantly. Infiltrating governments. Stealing secrets. Sabotaging enemies. Trust impossible. Verification essential. Intelligence critical. Space race emerged from same calculations. Sputnik 1957 shocked America. Soviets could launch satellites, could launch missiles, could strike America. Technology race accelerated. Apollo program, $25 billion. For 100,000 workers, 12 years. Landed humans on Moon 1969. Proved American technological superiority. Strategic advantage through innovation. All motivated by competition birthed at Yalta. Economic warfare became standard. Marshall Plan rebuilt Western Europe. Made it prosperous. Prosperity defeated communist appeal. Soviet command, economy stagnated. Fell further behind. By 1980s, Soviet GDP per capita 1/3 of American. Eastern European economies collapsed. Standards of living plummeted. Freedom correlation with prosperity became obvious. Captive populations saw West thriving. Saw East suffering. Wanted change. Eventually demanded it. Economic calculations from Yalta enabled eventual Soviet collapse. Not through war. Through economics. Not through invasion. Through prosperity. Not through force. Through freedom's superior results. Soviets studied Yalta aftermath intensely. From Soviet perspective, America betrayed agreements. Roosevelt promised cooperation. Truman delivered confrontation. Roosevelt accepted Soviet security needs. Truman opposed Soviet expansion. Roosevelt understood territorial realities. Truman demanded impossible changes. Soviet archives reveal Stalin's genuine confusion. We implemented what Roosevelt accepted. Americans now object. Why? Khrushchev later. Stalin believed Roosevelt was honest. Felt betrayed by Truman. Soviets never understood Americans, didn't know what Roosevelt promised. Didn't know Truman never briefed. Didn't know extent of Roosevelt's secrecy. From Soviet view, duplicity, bad faith, betrayal. This belief shaped Soviet policy 45 years. Every American proposal examined for hidden betrayal. Every agreement scrutinized for secret clauses. Every negotiation approached with suspicion. Yalta taught Soviets, Americans can't be trusted, even when they sign agreements, even when they shake hands, even when they promise cooperation. Post-war Soviet archives show pattern. Initial trust in Roosevelt's promises. Shock at Truman's confrontation. Conclusion: Americans negotiate in bad faith. Decision to trust nothing. Ironically, mirror image of American conclusions. Americans thought Soviets betrayed Yalta. Soviets thought Americans betrayed Yalta. Both sides correct from their perspective. Both sides wrong about others' intentions. Both sides trapped by Roosevelt's dishonesty. Gorbachev 1987 interview. Yalta poisoned everything. Both sides felt cheated. Both escalated. Both lost trust. Reagan-Gorbachev Summit 1986 reviewed Yalta agreements. Both leaders shocked by vagueness. Both understood how miscommunication happened. Both agreed, never again. Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty 1987 included unprecedented verification. Inspections, monitoring, complete transparency. Trust nothing. Verify everything. Lesson from Yalta finally learned. 42 years later, Yalta created modern diplomatic documentation standards. Every agreement now requires clear language, specific definitions, measurable outcomes, verification mechanisms, enforcement provisions, dispute resolution, novage promises, no elastic interpretation, no secret clauses. Reagan said, trust, but verify. Should have been, don't trust. Always verify. International law evolved from Yalta's failures. United Nations Charter included specific provisions Yalta lacked. Article 2, Sovereign Equality of Nations. Article 51, Right of Self-Defense. Chapter 7, Enforcement Mechanisms. All lessons from Yalta's inadequacy. Helsinki Accords 1975. Soviet Union signed human rights commitments. Specific, detailed, monitored, enabled dissident movements, enabled pressure, enabled change, eventually contributed to Soviet collapse. What Yalta failed to protect, Helsinki eventually secured. Modern arms control emerged from Yalta's failures. SALT I, SALT II, START, New START, all include verification. Satellite monitoring, on-site inspections, data exchanges, no trust required, no good faith assumed, everything verified, everything monitored, everything documented. Technology enables what Yalta lacked. Proof. European Union founded partly to prevent another Yalta. Nations voluntarily integrated. Borders became fluid. Economic cooperation made war unthinkable. Democratic governance became requirement. Human rights became foundation. Everything Yalta failed to guarantee, EU institutionalized. Diplomatic training changed worldwide. Every foreign service officer studies Yalta. Learn what not to do. Learn dangers of vague language. Learn consequences of secret agreements. Learn necessity of verification. Case study in diplomatic failure. Template for avoiding catastrophe. Modern treaty negotiations take months, sometimes years. Lawyers review every word. Diplomats clarify every phrase. Nothing left to interpretation. Nothing left to trust. Everything specified. Everything documented. Everything verifiable. All because Yalta showed what happens without precision. Showed what vagueness enables. Showed what secrecy destroys. Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary joined NATO 1999. First former Warsaw Pact members in alliance. Symbolic reversal of Yalta. Nation Stalin claimed, now defended by America. Territories Roosevelt traded, now guaranteed by U.S. military. 2004. Baltic states joined NATO. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Nations Roosevelt let Stalin annex. Now protected by Article 5. Now guaranteed against Russian aggression. Yalta's betrayal finally reversed. 59 years later, but reversed. Ukraine crisis 2014 echoed Yalta debates. Russia annexed Crimea, invaded Donbass, claimed sphere of influence, claimed security concerns, claimed historical territories. Same arguments Stalin used. A response different. NATO expanded. Sanctions imposed. Ukraine armed. No acceptance. No accommodation. No deals. Lesson learned. Appeasing aggression enables more aggression. 2022. Full Russian invasion of Ukraine. NATO united. Billions in aid. Military support. Ukraine fights. West supports. Russia contained. Opposite of 1945. Opposite of Yalta. Opposite of accommodation. Eastern European leaders explicitly cited Yalta. Polish president. Never again will great powers trade our freedom. Baltic leaders. We remember being sold to Stalin. We won't be sold to Putin. Ukrainian president, Roosevelt traded nations. We fight to ensure no one trades us. Historical memory drives policy. Yalta's betrayal, still remembered, still shapes decisions, still motivates resistance. Memorial in Yalta, today, marks conference. Plaque. Here in February 1945, Allied leaders met to plan post-war world. Doesn't mention betrayal. Doesn't mention secret deals. Doesn't mention consequences. Ukrainian authorities want new plaque. Proposed. Here Roosevelt traded freedom for promises Stalin never kept. 100 million people paid the price for 45 years. Russia opposes. Debate continues. Even monument to Yalta remains contested. Even recognition of betrayal remains disputed. 75 years later. Harry Truman's final public speech, Independence, Missouri. 1971. Age 87. Year before death. Asked about greatest presidential accomplishment. Expected, Marshall Plan. NATO. Desegregating military. Instead, standing firm after Yalta. Pause. Roosevelt made deals he shouldn't have made. Kept secrets he shouldn't have kept. Left me to clean up disaster I didn't create. Another pause. But I refuse to let those deals define America's future. Refuse to let Stalin's interpretation of vague promises become reality. Refuse to abandon people Roosevelt's agreements endangered. Audience silent. It wasn't enough. Eastern Europe stayed captive. Millions suffered. I couldn't save them all. Voice cracked. But I saved what I could. Held line where I could. Fought back where possible. Long pause. Western Europe stayed free. Greece stayed free. Turkey stayed free. Berlin stayed free. Stronger now. And someday, maybe not in my lifetime, Eastern Europe will be free too. Because we didn't accept their captivity. Because we kept resisting. Because we never recognized Stalin's right to what Roosevelt's weakness enabled him to take. Standing ovation. 5 minutes. Truman died December 26, 1972. Didn't live to see NATO expansion. Didn't live to see Soviet collapse. Didn't live to see Berlin Wall fall. Didn't live to see Eastern European freedom. But made it possible by refusing Yalta's betrayal. By confronting what Roosevelt accommodated. By standing firm when predecessor folded. 17 years later, Berlin Wall destroyed. 19 years later, Soviet Union dissolved. 27 years later, Poland joined NATO. Truman's resistance vindicated. Roosevelt's accommodation repudiated. Yalta's betrayal reversed. Not in Truman's lifetime, but because of Truman's decisions. Because one president inherited disaster, refused to accept it, chose to fight it, spent lifetime reversing it, and ultimately succeeded. 45 years late, but succeeded. The Yalta betrayal taught the world. Secret deals enable catastrophes. Vague promises enable tyranny. Accommodation of evil enables expansion. Trust without verification enables betrayal. Weakness invites aggression. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing firm against inherited disaster creates victory your successor will see. That's Truman's legacy. That's Yalta's lesson. That's April 23, 1945. Day one president discovered predecessor's betrayal. Day one president decided to fix it. Day Cold War truly began. Day that ultimately led to freedom's victory. 11 days. One meeting. One betrayal discovered. 45 years. Millions souffrent. But eventual triumph. Because Harry Truman refused to accept what Franklin Roosevelt enabled. That's the story. That's the cost. That's the victory.